when a corrupt, anti-Trump judge brazenly insulted Karoline Leavitt right in court. He thought he was untouchable. But just minutes later, when she struck back, the entire courtroom fell silent. But before we dive into this explosive story, drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss out on breaking news. That day, inside a stifling federal courtroom, everything seemed to be proceeding as usual until Judge Maxwell Carter stormed to the bench, his face already flushed with anger. "No coffee in my court," he barked at the clerk, making the young woman flinch in shock. His patience was razor-thin. "Tell the defense team they have 2 minutes. If they're not here, I'll hold them in contempt." His voice thundered through the packed courtroom, the air heavy with tension. This was Maxwell Carter, a notorious Trump critic, infamous for his harsh treatment of anyone even remotely tied to the conservative side. And today, he was clearly in no mood for games. The clerk hesitated, then nervously informed him, "Sir, Press Secretary Leavitt has arrived to testify." Carter's face darkened instantly. His lips curled into a sneer. "Oh, how special," he muttered with pure disdain. "Tell her this isn't the White House. Her title means nothing here." But when Karoline Leavitt walked in, she was the picture of confidence. A thick stack of documents in her hands, she nodded politely at the court staff before fixing her gaze on Judge Carter, who glared back, his fingers tapping impatiently on the desk. His voice dropped to a low growl. "Let me make this clear. I am the law in this courtroom. Got that, Miss Leavitt?" But Karoline didn't flinch. Standing tall in the center of the courtroom, she met his glare with a steady, unwavering gaze. Then, a slight smirk tugged at her lips, a perfect mix of confidence and defiance. "Understood, sir," she replied coolly. "But the law isn't something you get to twist at will." The room held its breath. Carter's fists clenched. His face turned a deep shade of red, his breath coming faster. He leaned forward, pointing a shaking finger at her. "You dare lecture me about the law? In my courtroom? You Trump Gen Z brat." His voice boomed with fury. A few spectators snickered, while someone in the back whispered, "She's got guts." But Leavitt didn't care. She took another step forward, lifting her stack of documents high, her voice cutting through the rising tension. "I'm not here to lecture you, Your Honor. I'm here to testify to the truth, something you seem awfully unwilling to hear." The gavel slammed down hard, the sharp bang drowning out every murmur in the room. Silence. Carter's voice thundered. His eyes blazed with anger. "You're not a lawyer. You're not a court official. You're just some empty Trump mouthpiece. What makes you think you have a say here?" But Karoline? Still unfazed. Her voice was calm, but there was an undeniable edge of power behind it. "I have a say when justice is at stake, sir." She held up her documents. "This case involves the Faith and Family Foundation, a charity our administration supports. And I have evidence, clear, documented proof, of their financial transparency." Carter let out a mocking laugh, leaning back in his chair. "Evidence," he scoffed. "Charity? Don't insult my intelligence, Miss Leavitt. I know this game. Rich conservatives hiding money behind faith and family. Don't waste my time with fairy tales." But Karoline didn't waver. She calmly flipped to the first page and began reading. March 15th, 2024. The Faith and Family Foundation held a donor meeting in Manchester, New Hampshire. Every contribution was documented and publicly recorded. "Enough!" Carter bellowed, slamming the gavel again, his face practically purple with rage. "I don't need to hear that nonsense. This is a courtroom, not a White House press briefing." But Karoline? Unshaken. She lifted her chin, voice slicing through the heated air like a blade. "Independent audit records. Proving. No. Fraud." She locked eyes with him. "Do you want to see them, or are you afraid the truth will embarrass you?" The entire room went dead silent. Even the young clerk at the desk shrunk in her seat, as if fearing collateral damage. Judge Carter's knuckles turned white as he gripped the gavel, his teeth gritted in frustration. "You're crossing the line, Leavitt," he snarled, his voice trembling with barely contained rage. One more word, and I'll hold you in contempt right now. But Karoline? She just gave a small, defiant shrug. If you want to jail me for telling the truth, go ahead, she said, voice steady. But I won't stay silent while you try to bury justice. Carter shot up from his chair, pointing straight at her, breathing heavily. Justice? He spat, his voice breaking with fury. You dare talk to me about justice? A Trump puppet, a little girl who knows nothing about the law, standing here lecturing me? The gavel pounded against the wood, echoing through the courtroom. But as his eyes flicked, just for a split second, to the documents in her hands, a flicker of unease crossed his face. And Karoline? She caught it immediately. Her smile? Barely there, but devastatingly cold. I don't need to lecture you, Your Honor, she said, her voice smooth as ice. Your actions speak for themselves. And with that, the entire courtroom held its breath, waiting, watching, because in that moment it was clear. The judge wasn't in control anymore. Karoline Leavitt was. A woman stood, her voice cutting through the tense air, shouting. Blatant corruption. Judge Maxwell Carter froze, his eyes wide, face draining of color. Stop it. Turn it off, he bellowed, his voice cracking with panic. He lunged across the desk, reaching for the device in Karoline Leavitt's hands. But she stepped back swiftly, keeping it just out of reach. He stumbled, his balance failing, then crashed to the floor, papers scattering in all directions. Laughter erupted from the audience, mixed with angry jeers. Carter scrambled to his feet, his hair a mess, robe skewed, looking nothing like a federal judge, more like a desperate man watching his world collapse. It's fake, he shrieked, pointing a shaky finger at Leavitt. You made it up. It's a Trump conspiracy. Leavitt didn't move. Her icy gaze locked onto him. Fake, she asked, voice smooth, controlled. Then why are you panicking? The room went dead silent. She flipped another page. If it's not real, just calmly prove it. Carter's breath hitched. He wiped his face, sweat dripping as if he had been drenched in water. Then he did the unthinkable. With a sudden, wild burst of energy, Carter bolted, his feet pounding toward the back door, aiming for his private chambers. I can't take this anymore, he screamed, his voice breaking. 2 court officers reacted instantly, moving to block the exit. Sir, you can't leave, one said firmly. Carter spun around, his face ghostly pale, eyes darting. You're betraying me, he howled. All of you. He flailed wildly, like a cornered animal, as the courtroom descended into chaos. Spectators jumped from their seats, some clapping, others booing. A man's voice rang out. Serves him right. Phones recorded everything. Carter staggered back toward the bench, slamming his hands down. But his gavel was gone, knocked to the floor during his earlier outburst. His chest heaved, his voice rising to a shrill wail. It's a setup. A setup, he screeched. Her and Trump. They framed me. I'm a federal judge. You can't touch me. But Karoline Leavitt? She stepped closer, her voice like a verdict being handed down. A setup, she said, tilting her head. No, Your Honor. This is the truth. And you can't escape it. She flipped another page, reading aloud. August 5th, your email to the Liberty Fund. The next case will need more support. Make sure the money's on time. Anything to say? Carter stumbled, his hands clutching the chair, his eyes desperately scanning for an exit. That's fake, he stammered. But his voice was weak, unconvincing.
Bem, aqui é sobre.
The young court clerk, shaking, rose from her seat. Tears streamed down her face as she pointed directly at Carter. He forced me to do it, she cried. All of it. The room gasped. He said I'd lose my job if I didn't erase the files. I didn't want to, but I was scared. Carter stood frozen, his lips trembling.
Because now?
There was nowhere left to run.